back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. This is going to be the first one that we do in January, and this one will be a solo one. But there were 4 questions that were sent in that I felt like were somewhat important with regard to timing. Like I didn't want to record this and then not put it out to March, just because I think it's relevant to a few timing things. So I want to go ahead and record it, even if it is solo, just to give you guys some good information on questions that you are asking. So there's 4 questions that we're going to cover this week. The new dietary guidelines were released actually yesterday, and there's already quite the buzz on the internet, and many of you have already had questions. So we'll look at those and talk about what are the primary new features in the dietary guidelines that have not been in there before. I'll tell you what, in my opinion, I think that they got right. I'll tell you, in my opinion, what I think that they got wrong. And then I will share with you 2 just important things to remember as you start to get, you've probably already getting tons of reels and posts and etc. from people that you follow on social media. And they will be 2 very, very different and conflicting pieces of information, which inevitably makes you wonder which one of these are right. I mean, this is the epitome of why there's so much confusion in the world of nutrition right now. So I'll give you my take on that. We had some questions about high intensity interval training versus low intensity steady state training, and what is better for fat loss. Trying to get the most bang for your buck. And as you can imagine, the answer is not as direct and straightforward as you might think, but there are a couple of things worth considering when you talk about that topic. We had a question on, is it possible to eat too few carbs, too few proteins, or too few fats in a given day? Is there any of those macronutrient groups that we can get ourselves into trouble by going too low on? And this question was framed in reference to somebody trying to change their nutrition into the new year. And so we'll talk about the details there, because the answer to that is there are actually some nutrients that you can go too low on, and it is deeper than just protein, which seems like maybe the most obvious. Fourth, and finally, will creatine alone help me grow a more capable muscle? And so I'll answer that directly, why or why not. And then share with you some pieces of information that will definitely help if you're trying to put on some muscle. So if those topics interest you, stick around, and we will cover those. If you need to pause it, you can always come back to it. I do like doing these, kind of giving you a heads up on what's coming, because then that gives you the ability to come back to it if you want to. And I'm pretty sure that you can look at chapters and the show transcript and pick up where you left off if you needed to. So all right, we'll start with the dietary guidelines. So there's really 7 new features that are in there. So number 1 is this overall idea of trying to eat mostly whole foods and less processed foods. Now, guidelines have always kind of hinted around at that, but they've never directly came out and said it, and they've never put this much of an emphasis on it. So that's one new change. The second change, this is one of the first dietary guidelines where they have actually increased and encouraged a higher intake of protein. I'm going to share with you my thoughts on all of this at the end, but I'm just going through them right now. Number 3, full fat dairy and other high saturated fats are encouraged. There's a much higher encouragement of getting your calories from fat versus other nutrients. Number 4, added sugars and processed foods are strongly discouraged. I kind of touched on that above, but one thing they really drove home was, look, we really don't want people getting any processed sugars. And, processed sugar, for example, would be sugars that are found in candies or found in packaged baked goods, like your Hostess muffins or any brand muffin for that matter, your candy bars, your sugar, your sodas, your Gatorades, those type of things. And I will caveat in here that included among those are these new, quote, healthy pre and probiotic drinks and kombucha and all these other things. These all funnel under the heading of added sugar. So there's a strong encouragement of less of that. Number 5 is the alcohol guidance change. So historically, we've always said, look, it would be good for no one to drink. Like, there is no benefit from drinking alcohol to where if you don't currently drink, you should begin. But we used to say, if you're gonna drink, set a cap on it. 1 drink per day for women, 2 drinks per day for men. And what constituted a single drink varied based on whether it was wine or beer or hard liquor or, whatever your drink of choice was. They removed that. There is no upper threshold. Number 6, there's a revised food graphic. And you can look at this if you want to. I'll even try to remember this in the show notes, but you probably remember this pyramid and, vegetables and fruits and whole grains on the bottom. And then as it went up, they discouraged less and less of that. And they basically flipped it. So they put at the bottom of this pyramid foods that we used to generally encourage, as much as we could. And then on the top, they listed a lot of stuff that we were, somewhat discouraging, or we used to somewhat discourage. So that was a major change. I mean, for example, at the very bottom of this, which is foods that they are saying, look, we don't want you to get very many of these, is whole grains. And then at the top, there's a lot of meats and fats. Now, and then finally, one of the changes that were different is it is a much shorter, more simple document. It's always been this page after page after page after page of science and literature, which I think has its place, has its value, and I still think that they should put that out for professionals who want to go and research, where did you get your data from? What are you drawing from? Where are these conclusions coming from? But I do think a shorter, simpler document is really good for people who aren't necessarily interested in reading about all the nitty-gritty, and it can be better to understand. So that's the major 7 changes. And again, you can go look up the document. You can go look up the visual graphic of the pyramid that they've got now and find out anything that you want. And again, I'll try to link these in the show notes. So here's what I think that they got right. Number 1 is the encouragement of whole foods. And, the phrase that we always use for this is single ingredient, nutrient dense foods. And the main reason that we suggest it is in everything that you see, both observationally and working with people, and then in everything that you see subjectively getting reports from people, everything that you see in actual data and research would say that almost every positive health outcome improves when people have an emphasis on this in their diet, and almost every negative marker of health goes down when people eat a predominantly whole foods diet. And so getting this, encouraged from a really, really large group as far as from the dietary guidelines, I think is a really great thing. So that is definitely one thing that I think that they got right. Number 2, and this may come as a shock to you, but listen to my entire explanation, is the limitations on carbohydrate intake based on activity, especially from added sugar. For most of us, most of our jobs are not physical. Most of us are not training enough in a day to warrant these really, really high carb intakes from added sugars. Now, caveat, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So again, one of the biggest problems that we see culturally in America is this word obesity, right? And the biggest problem with the word obesity is nearly every chronic disease that you see has this as the main cause of it. So we know that obesity behind the scenes, being above a weight that a person is healthy for a person, drives almost every chronic disease. And when you study this, you find that there's no real single food causing this. You find that it is a collection of foods that are really, really high in carbs, really, really, really tasty, really, really high in added fats and really, really difficult to control because of that. And like we've used the example on here before, I could eat an entire bag of chips not based on hunger alone. I'm going to keep going back for more chips simply because they taste good. If you give me a bag of apples, I may be able to get through two before I'm saying, look, no more apples. I might be able to choke down, 5 or 6 pieces of broccoli and 10 carrots before I'm like, man, I'm done. I can't do anymore. So what we say for this is you have a very, very high palatability, meaning they are really, really tasty, low nutrient, non-filling, low satiety, high calorie foods. That means it is very easy to get a ton of calories in because these foods are not filling. They have zero nutrition in them whatsoever, and they're just tasty. So we keep going back for more. We keep going back for more. We keep going back for more. Excess calories leads to obesity. Obesity leads to nearly every chronic disease. So I think it is great for us to have this broad message now of like having a really high intake of these really tasty foods is definitely not good. So the more that we can limit this, the better off that we can do. Now, if you are training, and remember that carbs have their case use, they should be used in certain scenarios. So when you are on the mountain, when you are running an ultra, when you are on a ski tour, when you are on a training, a bout of training that lasts greater than 70 to 80 minutes, these types of fuel sources certainly have their place because they are going to hit the muscle and allow you to continue on. And then, and as a part of that, we also see that does not have the same negative impact on your health that I just talked about with obesity because your body is using it as fuel. So while I think that the overall message of less added sugar is really great, do not forget that everything has a case use, and all those negative things that I just attributed to added sugars are somewhat of a moot point for the very, very, very active person, especially while they are in the middle of a round of training. So remember that there is always that caveat of it depends, and case use and specificity of the person is going to be where that lands. Number 3, as far as what they got right. Encouragement of higher protein intake. The protein intake for the average American public has been 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight, and that has been way too low for way too long. And it doesn't matter what side of the coin you fit on with nutrition and health, like that is one thing that we all agree is ridiculous. So I do think that the encouragement of people to have a higher protein intake is really good. Now, the question that comes after that, of course, is, well, what is that higher protein intake? And I think that you can get very nuanced based on a lot of things. And part of that is, is this person really active? Does this person have a really active job? Is this person building a block of training around strength? Because if those are the cases, their protein intakes are going to need to be higher. What we do know, and what I can confidently say is this, and I think that we could this is something that you could take away and apply. We know that at 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight is about the point the muscle building switch gets turned on. So that's a generally good target to aim for. Now, I said 0.8 grams per kilo is what it had been. I'm recommending 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound of your ideal weight. And the ideal weight is the weight that you feel comfortable at. Don't get lost in calculations and all this, that, and the other. Just whatever weight you feel like you should be at, that's what I would base my ideal off of and use those numbers as. Now, quick caveat is if you have any protein processing disorders or your kidneys don't work very well or whatever, then those thresholds should and can be lower. But for the average healthy person, 0.7 to 0.8 grams per pound of ideal weight, comfortable weight, whatever, term you want to put in there, would be a great target to aim for. Here's where they missed it, in my opinion. Number 1, the encouragement of beef tallow, whole milk, butter, high saturated fat intake. Now, listen to my point here in its entirety, and you can see why people get really confused. So number one, I personally have observed where people started on this type of a diet to the date in their lab work where their cholesterol, their LDLs, their ApoBs, almost every lipid marker shoots through the roof. We know when those lipid markers shoot through the roof, there is a much higher correlation to people having cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular events. You can say otherwise, but that is what we see. So to recommend these without these caveats attached to them makes most people think these foods are healthy. And one thing that we certainly have an issue with is a moderation of dose that's either all good or it's all bad. So I guess the concern would be that you are portraying these foods as healthy, especially putting them at the top of the pyramid. You're going to have people who do not change their lifestyle and overconsume calories on these types of foods, thinking they are improving their health, and they definitely will not do that. Now, here's the caveat and the irony of all of this. In the same breath, the dietary guidelines recommend that saturated fat intake be kept below 10% of your total calorie intake. That is really, really hard to do when your pyramid recommends that a bulk of the diet should be from foods that are high in saturated fat. So I can't even tell you why they did that, and I can't even tell you how that's possible because it's not. If you are recommending a high intake of these foods, high in saturated fat, there is no way that person is going to be able to keep it to less than 10% of their total intake. So 10% is right. I would keep it below 10%, but I would try to get the rest of my fat from, sources that are high in unsaturated, because we see whenever saturated fats are replaced with unsaturated, heart-healthy fats, all of those lipid profile numbers tend to go down. So zero clue what they were thinking on that one. Number two, no limitations on alcohol. What was most interesting about this was when asked why it was changed, one of the senior level advisors, who you may know as famed TV personality Dr. Oz, who's giving information on this, said, well, we think that people, I'm paraphrasing here, we think that people socialize, and that's really healthy. And a lot of people socialize over alcohol. So we think that they should be able to enjoy that in moderation. So we took the limitations off, thinking, they may socialize and not have to worry about this part of their life. And that to me blows my mind that you would remove this cap based on people's social drinking. And again, now they do caveat this by saying it would be better for no one to drink. Oh, but by the way, in case you do, we're going to lift the cap because just so you have a good time. And there is nothing that we see in data or in experience in working with people where having alcohol does anything of any value to your health. We only see the opposite. So at least giving people targets to stay under is good to completely lift them. Again, and this is my personal opinion, so take that for what it's worth. But again, to me insinuates, oh, they're not so worried about this after all. So yeah, maybe it's not that I'm going to go out and just get absolutely blitzed, but yeah, I'm probably not going to stop at that limitation of 2 anymore, because after all, they lifted the limitations and they study this. This is from researchers. So I think they missed the mark on that one for sure. Number 3, and I would say this ties into the first, my thoughts about saturated fat is overall idea that whole grains, fruits, veggies, etc. are things that we should limit, especially whole grains. Now, if you look at the pyramid, they have strategically placed fruits lower in the pyramid and then non-starchy vegetables higher in the pyramid. Not a bad play, but they put whole grains like oats, whole wheat bread, etc. down at the bottom. And here's why I think it was where they missed the mark on this. Not only do we see where whole grains drive down most of the markers that combat cardiovascular disease, you now have this message in tandem with increasing the intake of foods that we know drive cardiovascular disease. So like it is basically going to set those in opposite orders. So that's number one. Number two, we tend to see again that as whenever it talks about driving down risk of chronic disease, especially risk of cancers, especially risk of colon cancers, whole grain intake, fruit and vegetable intake is a major part and plays a major role in doing so. So by discouraging the intake of some of these foods, you're not only potentially giving a negative message about a food that's really great for people, but you could potentially be putting that person at higher risk by not having these foods in their normal intake. So yeah, I think again, kind of missed the mark on that one for sure. Now here is my like overall thoughts, my final takeaway for you to consider as you are getting bombarded with messages online over the next few weeks, and you probably have already been getting bombarded with messages by the time that this is going to go out. You're going to have a lot of proponents say, finally, this is what we've been waiting for. This is, the pyramid that's going to save us all. That is not true. Simply adopting this pyramid without additional lifestyle changes will not make you any healthier than staring at a book is going to make you smarter. The primary driver of good health is a combination of things done with consistency. That combination of things includes movement, it includes activity, it includes not smoking, it includes as little to no alcohol intake as you can possibly muster. It includes being at a weight that is healthy for your lifestyle. It includes, a diet that is built mainly around healthy fats, rich in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. So you'll hear proponents say this, but remember, just doing this alone will not make any of us any healthier. It's a combination of things done with routine consistency. Second, you will have naysayers. You will have, and this will be, to be honest with you, people in my profession. You will have naysayers. My gosh, this administration has no clue what they're talking about. You're drawing your input from Dr. Oz and from RFK. Does he even have any nutrition background? You'll hear all of this, and then they will start talking about the different dietary guidelines and when they miss the mark about butter and full-fat dairy, etc. Remember this. It's the dose that makes the poison, and it's the sum of the parts of a person's lifestyle that matter the most. So even if these recommendations weren't in there, having a piece of really fatty meat, having butter, having whole milk dairy will not cause cardiovascular disease. The dose will. So remember that just because I am sitting here saying, yeah, some of these foods, they're correlated with X, Y, and Z, what we tend to see is that people are over consuming them. And that's the takeaway message is it's always the dose, regardless of the pyramid, regardless of the type of food, regardless of the case use, it's always the dose and the case use, I guess, that are going to make the poison. It is never as simple as these reels and short carousels on Instagram want you to believe. There's always more to the story. You've got to find what works for you. And hopefully, we are helping you do that. And I would tell you to, put my comments on here. Vet them, right? I mean, see if they measure up to what you know to be true and what is out there. And I will link again this pyramid in the show notes so you can go look at it if you are interested. Second question: high intensity interval training versus cardio. Let me back up. High intensity interval training cardio versus low intensity steady state cardio for weight loss. Now, some background, low intensity steady state would be exactly what it sounds like. A movement that is ongoing over a long period of time, steady state, lower intensity. You're not pounding the pavement. It's not difficult. It's not really intense. Your heart rate's fairly low. Most of you would probably call this like a zone 1, zone 2 style of workout. And so this person's question is, which of these are superior for weight loss? And part of this question was, I am reading, particularly from a really well-known female doctor online, that I need to be doing high intensity interval training if I have any hope at fat loss. And that simply is not true, right? So energy expenditure is going to be the part of the equation that matters the most in that. Now, meaning if all things were created equal and you were to calculate 300 calories burned during a high intensity interval training session, and you were to calculate 300 calories burned in a low intensity steady state training session, you've burned 300 calories. It doesn't matter how you do it. You will lose the same amount of body fat because, again, it is a part of the energy intake versus expenditure part of the equation. We know that to be true for one. Now, where high intensity interval training could be a particular interest to you is in its ability to create that 300 calorie expenditure much faster than low intensity steady state interval training. Now, that sounds really great, but the potential downsides of that are we also see where high intensity interval training causes a higher degree of stress, which increases the stress hormone, which causes water retention, which slows weight loss. So there again is the answer of it always depends, and you have to balance those two things and try to decide what is going to be the best for you. Now, a couple more thoughts on this before I give you hopefully what is a more realistic plan to follow is this. When we studied this and we did a really, really, really big research study on the differences and the impacts between high intensity interval training and low intensity steady state, or what you may call zone 2, here is what we found. We found that the interval training is not superior when you're trying to reduce body fat or abdominal visceral fat characterized by excess weight. We did find interval training to be more beneficial at lowering fasting blood glucose and more beneficial and increasing VO2 max. Now, you need to know this before you just think that high intensity interval training is far superior. Of course, it is going to make your fasting blood glucose lower in that training session because higher intensities rely on blood glucose and carbohydrates to fuel that workout. So it's basically using more fuel during that workout. The other thing to know is that yes, it will increase your VO2 max, but it has its limitations because of the intensity. And this is where a good training program comes into play, because a good training program, if you're preparing for the mountains, is going to have a mix of these things. It's going to be, and you have heard about it being extremely beneficial to do all of this zone 2. But if you have read and have a good training program written, there are days of intensity sprinkled in there. And those days of intensity tend to increase some of the VO2 max, which allows you to go harder and or faster and not feel like you are doing it as it is not as difficult as it seemed whenever you first started training. So there are some potential advantages to sprinkling those high intensity interval training sessions in there, but here's the most important things to remember. Number one, you need to do what you enjoy because that is what you are going to be most likely to show up for. And consistency beats and trumps all things. And so that is the first thing that you've got to remember. Number two is make it realistic. It would be better to do 20 minutes of low intensity steady state than to think that you need 60 minutes and never be able to get it in because you don't have 60 minutes of margin in your day. Number three, as a part of that, I would automate it as much as you can. We say all the time on here and talk to the folks in Valley to Peak all the time about systems. Any outcome, any goal that you have, there should never be language in your head about, I hope I can reach that goal. You reaching that goal is a direct result of the system that you build to reach the goal. If you build the right system, the goal is yours, right? So if you automate it, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to go for a 20-minute walk. That way you can schedule it in, and Nothing interferes with it, but the more that it's automated and already set in place, same days, same times, same locations, you have an idea of what you're going to do when you show up, the more likely it's going to happen instead of having all of these barriers in the way that you've got to work out before you can ever get started. And then number 4, don't forget unconventional forms of movement, daily movement. Build yourself a weightlifting circuit. Maybe you can't even fathom the idea of getting on a treadmill for 20 minutes in the winter. Build yourself a weightlifting circuit. Do, like a bench, a push routine, a pull routine, and then row for 3 minutes, and then do that for 20 minutes, and you'll still are accomplishing the same cardiorespiratory benefits as though you were doing, your typical treadmill walking or what have you. And we did a podcast with a good friend of mine and a doctor here in Boise, cardiovascular doctor here in Boise, Dr. Matt Nelson, like 2 years ago. And that was his advice. His advice is, look, if you can do just a circuit every morning, that's one of the best forms of exercise you can do. Because we actually had him on the podcast to interview him. Because at that time, there were so many marathoners and ultra marathoners dying from heart attacks. And, the question that popped in my head was, if this is such a healthy thing, running an exercise, why is the heart not able to sustain it? And so we talked through all of that, and I will link that show because it was an awesome show, in my opinion. I'll link that in the show notes if you want to go back in and check it out. So if you're looking at the differences between trying to decide what's the best bang for your buck between high intensity interval training and continuous steady state cardio, and you're trying to lose weight, there's no difference. Do what you like. If you are trying to increase your VO2 max, there is a difference, and you may sprinkle in moments of intensity woven among a lot of zone 2, and that's going to be the best bang for your buck. So as always, specificity really matters in terms of training. And when I say specificity, what I mean is the type of exercise regimen that you're building needs to be built around what goal or outcome you desire to get that actual desire. And that's a really, really important thing to remember, but often overlooked by a lot of people. Question 3, is it possible to eat too few carbs, too few proteins, or too few fats? I'm trying to change my nutrition for the new year, but I'm concerned that I'm going to get it wrong and go too low in one of these areas if it matters. So let's go through them one by one. Is it possible to eat too few carbohydrates? No, it's not. Your body has a built-in mechanism to create fuel no matter what, based on what it is that you are taking in. And even in a scenario where you're not taking in fuel, like fasting or, God forbid, you're on a deserted island, it will break down body fat, it will break down muscle, turn that into glucose, and continue to fuel you, even though you've not been eating carbohydrates. So yes, your body will make glucose even if you're eating no carbohydrates. Now, is it possible to eat too few carbs and you're noticing that you can't get through a workout or you have really low energy? Yes. So there are thresholds that you would want to make sure that you're getting to make the most out of workouts, etc. So even though there is no requisite basement limit for health for carbs, you can go too low and suffer the consequences of it, even though you're not talking about, like a life, death, or physiologically related problem. Is it too low? Is it possible to get too few proteins? Yes, absolutely. You need, again, to be hitting a certain threshold for muscle retention, growth of the muscle, not to mention be able to grow your hair, repair a cut if you get one on your skin, to support overall health, etc. So yes, it is possible to get too few of a proteins in. And a very, very, very important thing to remember about proteins is, unlike carbohydrates and glucose, you cannot create a protein. The only way that you are getting sufficient protein is through the consumption of protein. So one of the main things that's responsible for the building of muscle, and that is in protein, is nitrogen, and you are only getting that through protein. Fats can't be turned into proteins. Carbs can't be turned into proteins. So you need to get it elsewhere. You can create, I'm going to use very loose terminology here, but you can create carbohydrates from proteins and from fats if you're not getting sufficient carbohydrate intake. That does not work the opposite way for proteins. So yes, it is possible to go too low. Is it possible to get too few fats in? Yes, it is. The negative impact that happens when you get too few fats on the less extreme end is you do not have a sufficient mechanism for transport of hormones like sex hormones, like testosterone and cortisol and all of these other hormones that people are so focused on now. If you get too few of a fat intake in, there is now no mechanism for transport of those hormones throughout the body. There is not enough of a mechanism available to absorb certain nutrients into your body if you get too low of a fat. And then more of the extreme end, you can start to develop essential fatty acid deficiency and potentially even problems with the gallbladder if there's not enough dietary fat in your intake. So there are numbers and thresholds that we want people to stay above. In that case, it's generally above 0.3 grams per pound. And again, when you hear that number, it's not always your current weight. It could be ideal weight. And there are several different avenues to travel down to try to determine what that is. So I don't even want to attempt that on a podcast. It's not as straightforward of an answer as it is when it comes to protein. But the answer to that is yes. So no, you cannot go too low. You cannot eat too few of carbs when you're talking strictly about health, but you certainly can for energy. You can eat too little proteins, and you can eat too little dietary fats. Here's what I would tell you. Don't limit yourself on any. A calorie deficit is going to move your weight in whatever direction you want, either be it up to support growth of the muscle or down to support fat loss. Get a mix of foods, get a mix of macros, and you are very, very, very likely going to cover your bases without having to worry if you're going too low in any area. Number 4, will creatine help me grow a more capable muscle? Will creatine alone help me grow a more capable muscle? It absolutely will not. The thing that stimulates muscle growth is you need to have consistent and routine resistance training. That resistance training needs to also be progressive. In other words, your body and your muscle is designed to adapt to a stress or a stimulus because it recognizes that's the new baseline. That's the new expected norm. And when it adapts to that, it will no longer keep growing unless a new stimulus is applied. So it needs to be progressive. Apply a stimulus, let the body adapt. Apply a new and greater stimulus, let the body adapt. Apply a new and even greater stimulus and let the body adapt. That is how you grow a muscle. That is how you get stronger. That does not happen with any supplement alone, including creatine. Now, tier 2, you need to have sufficient protein intake to allow that muscle to grow, repair, and recover. Creatine alone will not do that. You, number 1, need sufficient protein intake. And that protein intake needs to be distributed fairly evenly throughout the day. You don't want a breakfast with no protein, a lunch with no protein, pretzels and Diet Coke, a snack later in the afternoon, a Snickers bar with no protein, and then a 67-ounce steak at dinner. You want little trickle doses all day, because by doing that, you are ensuring there is protein in the bloodstream for the muscle to pull from whenever it needs it, and you are making sure that that switch to rebuild that muscle is always on. If it goes to pull from that and it recognizes there is no protein in the bloodstream, you are not getting adequate protein in the bloodstream at that point and not getting maximum benefit from your workouts. Now, I view this like a stair. So if you had 5 steps leading up to a door, and on that 5th step was creatine, taking creatine without going over the bottom 3 stairs of resistance training, protein dosing, protein spacing, and hitting some of those basics, it does absolutely nothing. If you have checked all the boxes of the 4 stairs below the 5th one, can you now take creatine and expect a more capable muscle? Yeah, sure, try it out. But I want you to keep this in mind. One of the major values with creatine is it supports the energy system that is short burst activity. So If you take creatine and you're lifting weights, maybe you recover faster, and that allows you to do more sets, do more reps, because you are recovering faster between those sets in your actual training. The more volume, the higher volume is going to grow that muscle, not the creatine alone. So creatine is a secondary way to grow the muscle because of the work you are doing, but just taking the supplement is not going to make this muscle bigger or more capable. It is the work you are investing to do it. So guess who gets the glory in that case? Not creatine, it is you. So based on that, you need to decide whether or not it will do it, but it absolutely will not grow the muscle by taking creatine alone. You need these other things in place to grow a muscle, and if they are not there, then you've got some really fancy water, I guess. But anyway, I hope that helps answer some of the questions that you guys have been sending over, especially in light of the new year. I hope that you have or feel like you have a good synopsis and summary of the new dietary guidelines, and at least a good decision making tool to decide what you want to hang on to for you and your family and what isn't worth worrying about for you and your family. And if you have questions, after you read that you're wondering how they apply, or you're wanting clarification on them, I am happy to help you. Just send them over to us, info@v2pnutrition.com, and we'll get an answer back to you. We've already got 3 other episodes that we've done for the year, so those will be coming out over the next several weeks. If you have suggestions, recommendations, guests you want to see, send those to us. I would love to hear what you guys want to hear, because that's really all that we care about. And if you have not, we greatly appreciate you going in and leaving a comment or ranking the show too. That helps us out. So have a great week. We'll be back again in another couple of weeks with more episodes. We'll talk to you soon.